Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to each one of you, wherever you are joining me from tonight, perhaps tucked safely under a soft blanket in bed, curled up in your favorite cozy corner of the house, or lying somewhere tranquil as the world outside slowly quiets down. I'm truly grateful that you've chosen to spend this moment with me. Take a gentle, slow breath in and let it out even more slowly. Feel your shoulders soften and drop away from your ears. Maybe wiggle your toes just a little, then let them rest. Pull the covers up a tiny bit higher if you'd like, and allow the busyness of the day to quietly drift away, like leaves floating down a calm stream. Let your eyes grow heavy if they want to let your mind soften at the edges. There's nothing left to do right now. Nowhere else you need to be. London fog lay thick upon the city that autumn evening. At 221B Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge. Then came the knock. Mr. Elias Thorne found dead at his Southwark warehouse, strangled by what appeared to be invisible hands, marks upon his throat but no intruder seen. Scotland Yard saw a tragic accident or perhaps suicide, but Holmes saw a link, a faint residue of white powder on the victim's collar. One link in a chain that would bind a killer. The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The First Link. I set down these events as they occurred in the autumn of 1892, when a bitter chill had settled over London like a shroud. At 221B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes had fallen into one of his restless silences. The coal fire crackled in the grate, throwing warm light across the room, yet the air carried the sharp bite of his strong shag tobacco, mingled with the damp, coal smoke fog pressing against the window panes. His Stradivarius violin lay untouched on the table, its smooth, polished wood reflecting the flames. Mrs. Hudson had just carried up a tray of hot tea, its steam curling upward in the cold draughts that slipped through the cracks, when a sharp knock echoed from the street door below. Mrs. Hudson climbed the 17 worn steps and entered, a telegram clutched in her hand. "This came for you, Mr. Holmes," she said, her cheeks flushed from the climb. Holmes took the yellow envelope with languid fingers, unfolded it, and read aloud in a low voice. "Urgent. Murder at Southwark Warehouse, Tooley Street. Locked room, Lestrade." His eyes gleamed with sudden interest. He sprang up, coat already in hand. "The game begins, Watson. Come." We stepped into the thick fog outside, hailing a handsome cab whose iron-shod wheels clattered sharply over the wet cobblestones. The bitter cold nipped at our faces as we crossed London Bridge. Below us, the Thames gave off its familiar muddy reek, blended with distant coal smoke and the mournful hoot of foghorns. Holmes sat emotionless, steepled fingers beneath his chin, already forging invisible connections. The cab's worn leather seats creaked beneath us, smooth from years of use. At the warehouse, gas lamps cast long, wavering shadows through the mist. Constables held back a small crowd, while their lanterns swung gently. The air inside was heavy with damp timber, old rope, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Inspector Lestrade met us at the door, rubbing his gloved hands against the chill. "Thorne. Elias Thorne, the owner, found strangled an hour ago. Door bolted from inside, no broken windows, no ladder marks. The men think suicide or accident." His voice was tired, edged with frustration. The body lay near a stack of tea crates, face purpled and distorted, deep irregular marks encircling the throat like the coils of an invisible serpent. Holmes knelt at once, drawing out his lens. The warehouse felt morgue cold, my breath clouded in the dim light. A small brazier burned low in the corner, its embers crackling feebly and sending up wisps of acrid smoke. Rain began tapping steadily on the tin roof above. "Observe, Watson," Holmes said quietly, pointing with a gloved finger. On the dead man's stiff collar clung a faint dusting of white powder, fine, almost luminous in the lantern glow. He leaned close, sniffed, then touched it lightly. Talcum base, with a trace of something sharper, carbolic perhaps, or arsenic-laced dust, not ordinary warehouse grime. The powder had a silky texture, clinging stubbornly to the fabric. Holmes traced the strangulation marks again. See how uneven they are, pressure applied in jerks, as though the garrote slipped or the victim struggled violently. And here, he lifted the dead man's right hand. Powder on the fingertips as well, transferred from whatever he clutched at in his final moments. Lestrade snorted. He was alone, Holmes. Watchman swears no one entered or left. Perhaps he did it himself in despair. Debts were piling up. Holmes rose, pacing slowly before the brazier, firelight dancing across his sharp features. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. A locked room is not impossible. It is merely incomplete data. We returned to Baker Street late that night. The coal fire roared high now, its warmth a welcome contrast to the fog's bone-deep chill outside. Holmes filled his pipe from the Persian slipper, the rich tobacco aroma blending with the faint sweetness of brandy I poured for us both. He settled into his armchair, steepled fingers under his chin once more. "The white powder is the first link, Watson," he began. "A theatrical makeup base, or industrial lubricant, rare outside certain trades. It connects to the locked door, suggesting an intruder who left no obvious trace of entry." He drew deeply on the pipe, smoke curling upward like the fog itself. I recall the speckled band affair. A bell rope that was no bell rope, a ventilator too small for a man, yet death entered nonetheless. There the criminal relied on illusion and overlooked that even the subtlest traces, snake venom, milk saucers, gypsy encampment, form a chain when properly forged. Roylott thought the supernatural would shield him. Here, our killer trusts the locked room to do the same. But the ground remembers every step, and powder remembers every touch. He leaned forward, eyes bright. Therefore Thorne was not alone. A garrote dusted with this compound was passed through a hidden opening, perhaps a trapdoor or loosened board, and the killer vanished the same way, leaving only this faint link behind. The chain has begun, Watson. Did you forge it before I spoke? The connection seems invisible. Can you see it? We listed the suspects over our brandy. Reginald Blackwood, the business partner who had quarreled with Thorne over missing shipments. Amelia Thorne, the grieving widow rumored to entertain a secret admirer. Hargrove, the butler with a gambling debt and a criminal past. Victor Langford, a rival importer who stood to gain from Thorne's fall. Young Edgar Thorne, the nephew poised to inherit. And Silas Crowe, the watchman who claimed to have found the body. Holmes plucked a single string of his violin absently, the note hanging in the warm air. "Data, data, data," he murmured. "We shall gather more links tomorrow." Big Ben tolled distantly through the rain, a solemn punctuation. The taste of sweet brandy lingered on my tongue as I closed my journal. The link was there. Did you spot it before Holmes? What chain would you build from these first observations? Holmes saw 3 links already. How many did you see? The first link forged. The chain begins. Chapter 2. Forging Connections. As I continue this record from my journal, the fog of that autumn morning in 1892 seemed thicker than ever, wrapping London in a grey shroud that carried the sharp sting of coal smoke from 1,000 chimneys. Holmes was already at the breakfast table when I descended the 17 steps, his pipe sending curls of rich tobacco smoke into the warm air of our sitting room. The coal fire crackled steadily, its heat a welcome contrast to the bitter damp outside. Mrs. Hudson had left plates of bacon and hot tea. The bitter edge of the tea lingered on my tongue as Holmes folded the morning paper with a decisive snap. "We begin forging the chain today, Watson," he said, eyes bright. 4 locations, 4 suspects. Data first, conclusions later. Our first call was Reginald Blackwood's office in Lombard Street, a narrow thoroughfare where hansom cabs rattled ceaselessly over the slick cobblestones. The fog outside pressed against the tall windows, muffling the distant chime of Big Ben. Inside, the room smelled strongly of ink, old leather ledgers, and the faint mustiness of damp paper. Blackwood, a stout man with heavy mutton-chop whiskers, rose nervously from his desk as we entered. His hands trembled slightly as he offered us seats on worn leather chairs, their texture smooth and cracked from long use. "Mr. Holmes, I swear I had nothing to do with poor Elias's death," he began at once, voice thick. "We argued, yes, over those missing silk shipments from Bombay, but murder, never." Holmes paced slowly before the small fire in the grate, its crackling embers sending sparks upward. He bent to examine the mud caked on Blackwood's boots, dark, clayey loam mixed with flecks of coal dust. "You were at the docks recently," Holmes observed quietly. "This soil is peculiar to the Tooley Street wharves." Blackwood flushed, admitting he had visited the warehouse 2 days earlier to check inventory, but insisted he left well before nightfall. Holmes nodded, saying nothing more, yet I could sense another link sliding into place. We left in a hansom, the wheels grinding loudly on the whetstones, and made our way to Kensington and the elegant townhouse of Amelia Thorne. The drawing-room was warm, scented with lavender from a bowl on the mantel and a trace of cigar smoke that did not belong to the late Mr. Thorne. Mrs. Thorne received us in the deep morning black, her silk dress whispering softly as she moved to pour tea. The porcelain was hot in my hands. The tea itself carried a faint bitterness beneath its warmth. "My husband was troubled," she said, eyes downcast. "Debts, rivals, sleepless nights, but strangled in his own warehouse. It is monstrous." Holmes stood by the fire, steepled fingers beneath his chin, studying a framed photograph of the couple. He noted a faint ring of dust around its base, recently moved, and a single strand of dark hair caught in the frame. "You have had a gentleman visitor recently," he remarked. "Cigar ash on the carpet. Strong, Cuban tobacco, not the mild blend your husband preferred." She colored deeply, but admitted only that a business acquaintance had called to offer condolences. Holmes did not press further, yet the air between us felt charged as we departed. Our third visit took us back across the river to a narrow, dingy street in Southwark, where Hargrove, the butler, kept lodgings above a public house. The staircase reeked of stale ale and Thames mud. The rough wooden boards creaked under our boots. Hargrove opened the door himself, a gaunt, scarred man with wary eyes. His small room was cold, no fire lit, only the weak daylight filtering through grimy panes. On a shelf stood a small vial of white powder. Holmes lifted it without asking. "For shaving," Hargrove growled. "Keeps the razor smooth." Holmes uncorked it, sniffed, then replaced it carefully. "The same base as the residue on Mr. Thorne's collar," he said softly. Hargrove stiffened, protesting that half the men in London used talcum, yet his hands shook as he spoke of unpaid wages and old grudges. Footsteps thudded on the stairs below. Rain began drumming steadily against the window. Our final stop that afternoon was Victor Langford's warehouse near London Bridge. The vast space smelled of spices, tar, and the sharp bite of gunpowder from crates of imported fireworks. Langford, broad-shouldered and bluff, laughed off any suggestion of guilt. "Thorne undercut me in trade, but I fight with ledgers, not garrots." Holmes examined a ledger on the desk, noting fresh ink stains on Langford's cuff that matched the color used in Thorne's accounts. "You have handled his documents recently," Holmes said. Langford denied it hotly, yet the denial rang hollow. As the fog thickened again with evening, we returned to Baker Street. The coal fire roared. Its warmth seeped into my chilled bones. Holmes filled his pipe from the Persian slipper, the tobacco's rich aroma blending with the faint sweetness of the brandy I poured. He paced before the hearth, violin strings plucked absently once or twice. "Links are forming, Watson," he said at last. "Blackwood's mud ties him to the scene. Amelia conceals a visitor. Hargrove possesses the powder. Langford's ink suggests forgery or theft. Yet each thread is still loose, red herrings perhaps, or genuine clues." He drew deeply on his pipe, smoke curling like the fog outside. "The chain takes shape slowly, but it will tighten." I looked back over my notes, feeling the weight of what I had missed. "The connection seems invisible. Can you see it yet? The link was there. Did you forge it before Holmes? What chain would you build from these scattered observations?" Holmes saw 4 links emerging already. "How many did you spot?" Before he explains further, what does this growing evidence tell you? Links forging. The chain takes shape. Chapter 3. The chain grows. Looking back, I should have seen the growing connection between the white powder and the trades of our suspects, but my friend's mind moved several steps ahead of mine. The next morning, the fog still lay heavy over London, thicker now with the acrid bite of coal smoke drifting up from the river barges. We returned to the Tooley Street warehouse in a hansom, whose wheels clattered sharply on the wet cobblestones, the sound echoing off the high brick walls. The bitter coal seeped through my overcoat as we stepped inside. The air remained morgue-like, carrying the faint, lingering smell of carbolic from the police cleanup, and the ever-present muddy reek of the Thames nearby. Holmes wasted no time. Lantern in hand, he moved methodically along the edges of the main floor, tapping the rough wooden planks with the tip of his cane. Near the back wall, behind a stack of empty tea crates, he paused. "Here, Watson." He knelt and pressed against one board. It gave slightly. With a quick movement, he lifted it, revealing a narrow trapdoor concealed beneath. The hinges were recently oiled. The wood around the edges showed fresh scratches. A short ladder descended into darkness below. The ladder rungs were slick with moss and damp, their texture cold and slimy under my gloved fingers as we climbed down. In the low cellar the air was damper still, thick with the smell of wet earth and old brick. Water dripped steadily from somewhere overhead, each drop echoing in the confined space. Holmes swept his lantern across the dirt floor and immediately pointed to a set of footprints, distinctive boots with hobnails arranged in a cross pattern. "A bootmaker's mark," he murmured. not common. These led directly beneath the spot where Thorn fell. He crouched, examining the impressions closely. The soil was soft and clinging. Small threads of white silk were caught in the tread of one print. "Silk fiber," he said, "dusted with the same talcum powder. Our intruder came this way." We returned to the main floor. The body had been removed, but a chalk outline remained on the boards, ghostly in the lantern light. Holmes knelt again beside it, studying the garrote marks with renewed attention. Embedded in the deepest bruise, he found a tiny fragment of white silk thread, almost invisible to the naked eye. "The weapon was not ordinary cord," he said quietly. "A length of fine silk, powdered to improve grip and prevent slipping. Typical of stage conjurers or illusionists who perform strangling tricks without leaving obvious rope burns." At that moment, a constable brought forward a small object discovered during the morning search. A single gentleman's glove, dropped in the far corner of the cellar. The leather was smooth and well worn at the fingertips, monogrammed VL in faded gold. A light dusting of talcum clung to the inside cuff. Holmes lifted it carefully. "Victor Langford's initials," he observed, "yet the wear pattern suggests a smaller hand. A plant, perhaps, or a genuine slip." The foghorn moaned mournfully from the river. Rain tapped insistently on the tin roof above. "Observe this glove, Watson. The crucial link," Holmes said, holding it to the lantern light. "Leather softened by frequent use, powder inside to absorb sweat during exertion, silk threads in the sole print below. These details forged together. The link. Such gloves are favored by men who handle delicate cargo or who perform manual work requiring precision grip. The powder prevents chafing. The silk is strong yet light. The forge. I am reminded of the Musgrave ritual, where a discarded butler's glove and a scrap of ancient parchment formed the first links in a chain leading to buried treasure and sudden death. Brunton overlooked that even the smallest fabric trace retains the shape of its owner's habits. Here, too, the glove remembers its wearer's pressure, and the powder remembers its purpose. The cellar hid the entry, just as the old house hid its secret vault, yet both yielded to patient observation. The chain. Therefore, the assailant descended through this trap, wore or carried this glove, and used a powdered silk garrote to create the illusion of a supernatural wraith. The chain grows stronger, Watson. Did you see these links forming? Holmes saw 4 links now. How many did you spot? The bind. We questioned Silas Crow again in his small watchman's shack beside the warehouse. The shack smelled of stale tobacco and cold bacon grease. No fire burned, only a single candle flickering in the draft. Crow shifted uneasily on his stool, rough tweed coat scratching against the wooden wall. "I saw nothing till I found him dead," he insisted. Holmes pointed to the fresh mud on Crow's own boots, dark loam matching the cellar floor. "You have been below recently," Holmes said. Crow stammered an excuse about checking for rats, but his eyes darted away. Back at Baker Street that evening, the coal fire roared warmly against the bitter fog pressing at the windows. Holmes paced before the hearth, pipe in hand, smoke curling upward in slow spirals. The rich tobacco scent mingled with the faint sweetness of the brandy I poured. "The powder comes from fireworks preparation," he said at last. "Langford imports them, but Blackwood silks provide the garrote material, a partnership in illusion, perhaps to cover embezzlement." He plucked a single violin string absently. The note hung in the warm air. "You, dear reader, may have already deduced one of the red herrings. The connection seems invisible still. Can you see it? The link was there. Did you forge it before Holmes? What chain would you build from these new observations? Before Holmes explains further, what does this evidence chain tell you? The chain grows stronger. Logic binds. Chapter 4. Testing the links. The mystery had reached that uneasy stage where suspicion hung over every suspect like the fog itself, and Holmes set about testing each fragile link with the precision of a watchmaker. That morning, the bitter autumn fog still clung to London's streets, carrying the ever-present sting of coal smoke and the distant, mournful hoot of fog horns from the river. We began our work early, stepping out from the warm coal fire at 221B into the damp chill, our boots crunching on cold cobblestones slick with overnight rain. Our first test concerned Victor Langford's alibi. We drove in a hansom to his club in the Strand, a quiet establishment whose heavy oak doors shut out the noise of passing traffic. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the smooth, polished scent of leather armchairs. Langford had claimed he dined there the night of the murder with 3 business associates. Holmes spoke quietly to the steward, then to 2 of the men named. Both confirmed the dinner began at 7 o'clock and lasted past 10. Yet when Holmes examined Langford's cuffs, still bearing faint ink stains, he noted the exact shade matched the blue-black used in Thorne's warehouse ledgers. "Common ink, perhaps," Holmes murmured as we left. "But the timing does not quite align. This link bends, but does not yet break." Next, we visited the offices of Edgar Thorne's solicitor in Chancery Lane. The room smelled of old vellum and dust. The leather bound will lay open on the desk like an accusation. Edgar stood to inherit a modest sum after debts were paid, far less than rumor suggested. Holmes read the document carefully, then compared dates. The inheritance is encumbered by mortgages Thorne himself took out last spring, he said. Young Edgar gains little and loses a protector. Motive weakens here. The solicitor nodded confirmation. Another link tested and found wanting. From there, our hansom rattled southward again, this time to a smoky public house in Bermondsey, where one of Hargrove's drinking companions waited. The bar reeked of sour ale and damp sawdust. The fire in the grate crackled feebly against the chill seeping through the walls. The man, a docker with scarred knuckles, swore Hargrove had sat beside him playing dominoes from 6 until after midnight on the night in question. Couldn't have been nowhere near Tooley Street, he grunted. Holmes noted the man's steady gaze and the absence of hesitation. "This alibi holds," he said as we stepped back into the fog. "Hargrove's powder may be coincidence after all." We pressed on to Blackwood's shipping office near the docks. The air outside was sharp with tar and coal. Inside, ledgers lay open beside a small blazing fire, whose warmth fought the drafts. Holmes examined the manifests for the missing Bombay silks. No discrepancies appeared on paper. Yet, when he compared Blackwood's signature on recent receipts to Thorne's private notes, subtle variations emerged in the pressure and loop of certain letters. Not forgery in the usual sense, Holmes observed, but hurried imitation. He signed in haste, perhaps under pressure. The link tightened slightly rather than snapping. Our final call that afternoon was to Amelia Thorne's Kensington drawing room once more. The lavender scent had faded, replaced by the faint trace of pipe tobacco, different from Holmes's blend. Her maid questioned discreetly in the kitchen, while Amelia took tea upstairs, admitted a cloaked gentleman had called twice in the past week after dark. "Not Mr. Langford, sir," she whispered, shorter, quieter. "I never saw his face clear." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. The rumored lover existed, yet pointed nowhere decisive. As dusk fell and the gaslights flickered to life along the streets, we returned to Baker Street. The 17 steps felt heavier underfoot. The coal fire roared a welcome as we shed our damp coats. Holmes stood before the hearth, steepled fingers beneath his chin, pipe smoke curling slowly upward to mingle with the rich tobacco scent already filling the room. I poured us each a measure of sweet brandy. Its warmth spread through me as the bitter cold retreated. "Several links have shattered under test," Holmes said at last. "Langford's ink is suggestive but not conclusive. Edgar's inheritance too small for murder. Hargrove's alibi firm. Yet Blackwood's hurried signatures and the silk threads in the cellar footprints remain unyielding. The powder ties to fireworks or to theatrical preparation, and Blackwood's firm has lately supplied both. The glove, monogrammed VL, was almost certainly planted. Its leather shows no wear consistent with Langford's broad hands. He paced once and twice before the fire, its crackling the only sound for a moment. We have cleared the weak links, Watson. What remains is stronger for their absence. The true chain begins to emerge." I looked over my hurried notes, feeling again how much I had overlooked. "The connection seems invisible still. Can you see it yet?" The link was there. "Did you forge it before Holmes? What chain would you build from these tests and failures?" Holmes saw 3 solid links holding firm. "How many did you spot?" Before he reveals more, what does this sifting of evidence tell you? Weak links shattered. The true chain emerges. Chapter 5. The chain tightens. The chain had grown taut enough that Holmes could no longer tolerate delay. That gray autumn afternoon in 1892, the fog had lifted only slightly, leaving a damp chill that carried the ever-present smell of Thames mud and distant coal smoke. We set out from Baker Street in haste, Holmes's eyes gleaming with that peculiar light as he directed the handsome driver toward Silas Crow's lodgings in a narrow Southwark alley. The cab's wheels rattled loudly over uneven cobblestones. Rain began again, tapping insistently on the roof above our heads. Crow's door was ajar when we arrived. Holmes pushed it open without knocking. The small room reeked of stale tobacco and unwashed wool. A single candle guttered on the table. Crow stood frozen for half a second, then bolted through the back door into the yard beyond. Holmes was after him in an instant. I followed, heart pounding, as we chased the watchman down a twisting passage slick with rain. Footsteps slapped against wet stone. Foghorns moaned from the river like warning cries. Crow vaulted a low wall and darted toward the wharves. Holmes, long legs flashing, closed the gap and brought him down with a flying tackle near a stack of barrels. The man struggled briefly, breath coming in harsh gasps, rough tweed coat sodden and torn. I helped secure his wrists with Holmes's muffler while the rain drummed steadily around us. "Why run, Crow?" Holmes asked, voice calm despite the exertion. "I saw it. Saw the wraith," Crow panted. "Cloaked figure, hands like smoke, strangling the master. Thought it had come for me next." We brought him to Scotland Yard in another hansom. The journey silent, save for the clatter of wheels and the occasional drip from the roof. In a small, cold interview room, smelling faintly of carbolic and old coffee, Lestrade joined us. Crow sat hunched, shivering, while Holmes paced slowly before the narrow window. "Describe this wraith precisely," Holmes said. "Black cloak, tall, moved silent-like, face hidden. Wire in his hands, thin, glinting. Powder flew when he pulled tight." Holmes stopped pacing, Powder flew. From where? From the wire itself, sir, like dust shaken loose. A crucial link snapped into place. Holmes turned to me. Theatrical preparation, Watson. Stage magicians use powdered silk cord for invisible garrotes. Light, strong, and dusted to slide smoothly without friction burns. Crow's past. He was once a stagehand at the Surrey Theatre before drink ruined him. He knows these tricks. Crow's eyes widened. I never. You saw the murder, Holmes cut in, but did not report it because you feared implication. The intruder was no ghost. He was a man in a silk cloak, Blackwood's missing Bombay silks, disguised to create terror and confusion. The breakthrough came swiftly after that. Holmes sent a telegram to Blackwood's office. The reply confirmed recent shipments of fine white silk and fireworks powder to a theatrical supplier. Blackwood himself had been seen at the theater twice in the previous month. The embezzlement motive crystallized. Thorne had discovered irregularities in the accounts. Blackwood staged the Wraith murder to silence him and shift suspicion onto rivals or the supernatural. The silk fiber in the cellar print, the link, Holmes said, voice low and certain. Fine weave, talcum dusted for handling ease. It connects directly to Blackwood's warehouse stock. The link. Such material is uncommon outside importers of Eastern luxury goods or theatrical costumiers. The powder prevents snagging during quick movements. The forge. I recall the adventure of the empty house. Colonel Moran's air gun disguised as a walking stick, the wax bust in the window, the careful alignment of bullet and shadow. All links forged to create the illusion of an impossible shot from across the street. Moran overlooked that even the faintest crease in a curtain or puff of dust betrays presence. Blackwood made the same error with his powdered silk and trapdoor entry. The chain. Therefore, the murderer is Reginald Blackwood. He entered via the concealed trap, strangled Thorne with his own imported silk, scattered just enough powder to suggest something unearthly, then escaped the same way, leaving the planted glove to point toward Langford. The chain tightens, Watson. No escape now. Did you see these final links slide home? Holmes saw 5 links locked together. How many did you spot? The bind. Back at Baker Street that evening, the coal fire burned high, its warmth chasing the lingering chill from our bones. Holmes stood before the hearth, pipe in hand, smoke curling upward to blend with the faint sweetness of brandy in my glass. The rich tobacco scent filled the room. Rain pattered softly against the window panes, while Big Ben tolled distantly through the fog. The illusion was clever, Holmes reflected quietly. A locked room, a ghostly strangler, powder traces to suggest poison or magic. Yet every deception leaves its mark. Silk threads, boot prints, a watchman too frightened to speak truth. When you eliminate the impossible, the improbable remains. I nodded, still catching my breath from the day's chase. The connection seems invisible no longer. Can you see it clearly now? The link was there all along. Did you forge it before Holmes? What chain would you build from the theater powder, the silk threads, and the planted glove? Before he closes the circle, what does this tightening evidence tell you? The chain tightens. No escape now. Chapter 6. Links to the past. With Blackwood, now the focus of our chain, Holmes insisted we trace the roots of the crime before making any final move. The fog that autumn evening in 1892 had thickened once more, carrying the heavy smell of coal smoke and the muddy reek of the Thames as we made our way to Whitechapel. The hansom cab rattled over uneven cobbles, its wheels splashing through shallow puddles, that reflected the dim gaslights. Rain pattered steadily on the roof. The bitter cold seeped through the leather curtains, making me draw my coat tighter against the rough tweed. Our first stop was the modest house where Blackwood had lived before his rise in trade. The narrow street stank of damp brick and stale cooking fat. Footsteps echoed from unseen passers-by. A former housekeeper, now elderly and bent, answered our knock after long minutes. She led us into a small parlor lit by a single gas jet. The air was close, smelling faintly of old tobacco and camphor from moth-balled clothes. She spoke in a low voice, eyes darting nervously. "Mr. Blackwood was always clever with money," she said, "but never enough of it. Gambling clubs in the city, cards night after night. He borrowed from moneylenders, hard men. Last year, he came home pale as death, saying he'd found a way to settle everything. Something about silk shipments and a partner who trusted him too much." Holmes listened without interruption, steepled fingers beneath his chin, while I noted the woman's trembling hands on the worn tablecloth. From there, we proceeded to the offices of Blackwood's former solicitor in Leadenhall Street. The fog pressed against the tall windows. Inside, the room smelled of ink, sealing wax, and the smooth leather of bound ledgers. The solicitor, a thin man with pince-nez glasses, produced a file at Holmes's request. Mr. Blackwood took out several loans against anticipated profits from Eastern imports, he explained. When shipments were delayed, interest mounted. He spoke of a reconciliation with Mr. Thorne, some arrangement to cover the shortfall. But the papers show discrepancies. Silk bales recorded as delivered, yet never arriving at the warehouse. Holmes examined the ledgers closely, noting hurried corrections in Blackwood's own hand. The fire in the grate crackled feebly, sending a faint warmth against the chill drafts. The motive was now plain. Blackwood had embezzled funds, falsifying records to hide losses from gambling debts. Thorne had begun to suspect. A quiet confrontation at the warehouse would have exposed him. Rather than face ruin and prison, Blackwood had chosen murder, staging the Wraith to deflect suspicion onto rivals, debts, or even the supernatural. Back at Baker Street that night, the coal fire roared high, its crackling a steady counterpoint to the rain drumming against the panes. Holmes stood before the hearth, pipe in hand, the rich tobacco smoke curling upward to mingle with the faint sweetness of brandy in my glass. The room felt warm and secure after the cold streets. The Stradivarius rested nearby, its polished wood gleaming in the firelight. "Every link now connects to the past, Watson," Holmes said quietly. The powdered silk garrote from his own shipments, the trapdoor he knew from years of visiting the warehouse, the planted glove to cast blame on Langford, his old competitor. Even Crow's terrified silence served him, though a fear of implication kept the watchman mute. He drew deeply on his pipe, eyes distant. I am reminded of the adventure of the stockbroker's clerk. There, too, a man of business created an elaborate deception to conceal theft. A false position was offered, identical offices prepared, even twin brothers employed to confuse identity. The criminal, Pinner, overlooked that handwriting, posture, and the smallest timeline discrepancy would forge an unbreakable chain. He thought distance and disguise would shield him. Instead, they betrayed him. Here Blackwood relied on illusion and terror, forgetting that silk threads cling, powder lingers, and boots carry the very earth they tread upon. He paced once before the fire, then stopped. The embezzlement began 18 months ago, small at first, then desperate. Thorne's discovery was the final pressure. The wraith was born not of malice alone, but of panic. Past and present are now one unbroken chain. I looked over my notes by the fire's glow, feeling the weight of how the pieces had fallen into place. The rich scent of tobacco filled the room. Big Ben tolled distantly through the fog, a solemn reminder of time passing. The taste of sweet brandy lingered on my tongue as I closed the journal for the night. The link was there all along. Did you forge it before Holmes? Watson missed several connections. Did you? What chain would you build from the gambling debts, the falsified ledgers, and the theatrical tricks? Holmes saw 6 links locked firmly together. How many did you spot? Before the final confrontation, what does this history of desperation tell you? Past and present, one unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The complete chain. The fog that clung to London on the final evening of our investigation seemed almost symbolic, as though the city itself held its breath. We had summoned the principal parties to 221 B. Baker Street under pretext of a final consultation. Reginald Blackwood, Amelia Thorne, Victor Langford, Edgar Thorne, Hargrove the butler, and Silas Crowe. The sitting room felt crowded yet hushed. The coal fire crackled steadily, throwing warm light across the faces turned toward Holmes. The air carried the rich scent of his shag tobacco, the faint, carbolic trace from Crowe's coat, and the damp wool of overcoats hung in the hall. Rain tapped softly against the window panes while Big Ben tolled the hour in the distance. Holmes stood before the hearth, tall and composed, steepled fingers beneath his chin. He spoke quietly at first, letting each word fall like a hammer on an anvil. Gentlemen and madam, the chain is forged. Link by link, every piece of evidence binds one man alone. He turned first to the physical traces. The white powder on Mr. Thorne's collar and fingertips was talcum mixed with a trace of arsenic-laced dust, used in theatrical preparation to prevent silk from snagging during rapid handling. This powder matches samples from fireworks shipments handled by Blackwood's firm. It also clings to the inside of the planted glove found in the cellar. The garrote itself was a length of fine white silk from the missing Bombay bales, strong, light, almost invisible in dim light, and dusted for grip. Silk fibers were recovered from the deepest strangulation mark and from hobnailed boot prints in the cellar dirt beneath the trap door. These are not random. They form the first unbreakable segment of our chain. He moved to the timeline. Mr. Thorne was killed between 9 and 10 o'clock. Blackwood's club alibi collapses. The steward recalls him leaving at 8:15, claiming a headache. A handsome driver I trace confirms delivering a passenger, matching Blackwood's description to Tooley Street at 8:40. He returned to his club after 11, disheveled and claiming he had walked to clear his head. The warehouse watchman, Mr. Crowe, saw a cloaked figure enter but feared speaking. Fear Blackwood later exploited. Holmes glanced at the witnesses. Mr. Crowe witnessed the murder, but described a wraith because terror and prior stage knowledge suggested supernatural illusion. Mrs. Thorne's maid saw a shorter cloaked gentleman call at her house. Blackwood, not Langford. Hargrove's powder vial was innocent shaving talc. Langford's ink stains were coincidental. Edgar's inheritance proved too small for motive. All other suspects fall away. Only Blackwood's movements align. He addressed motive directly. Blackwood's gambling debts, documented by his former housekeeper and solicitor, had grown desperate. He embezzled from Thorne's accounts falsifying silk shipment records to cover losses. Thorne discovered the discrepancies and confronted him privately at the warehouse. Rather than face ruin, Blackwood chose murder, staging an impossible crime to deflect suspicion onto business rivals or ghostly tales. Finally, the connecting link. The last link is simplest yet decisive. The mud on Blackwood's boots when he called here 2 days after the murder. It was not ordinary street mud. It was the same reddish clay mixed with coal dust and silk threads found in the cellar beneath the trap door. Only one place in London yields that exact combination, the rear yard of Thorne's warehouse, where rainwater pools near the coal chute. He trod there on the night of the crime and carried the evidence away on his soles. Blackwood had sat rigid throughout. Now his face drained of color. He rose halfway, then sank back. "You cannot prove," he began hoarsely. Holmes cut him short. "I have proved it, sir. The chain is complete. Every link accounted for. The powder that betrays theatrical method, the silk that ties to your shipments, the trapdoor you knew from years of partnership, the planted glove meant to incriminate Langford, the timeline that leaves you alone at the scene, the debts that drove you to desperation, and the mud that remembers every step you took." Blackwood's shoulders slumped. After a long silence, he spoke in a low, broken voice. "I never meant— The debts were crushing. Elias found the books. He said he would give me time to repay if I confessed to the police. I panicked. The silk cord was in the warehouse, the powder from the last fireworks case. I thought if it looked impossible, no entry, no exit, suspicion would scatter. I never meant to kill him, only to frighten." Lestrade, who had waited quietly in the doorway, stepped forward with constables. Blackwood offered no resistance as the cuffs were fastened. His eyes were dull, defeated. Holmes turned to the others. "Mrs. Thorne, your husband's name is cleared of any suspicion of suicide. Mr. Langford, the ink and glove were clumsy attempts to divert attention. You are free of taint. The rest of you may go in peace." As the room emptied, only the fire's crackle remained. Holmes stood motionless for a moment, then reached for his pipe, drawing thoughtfully. "You know my methods. Watson," he said softly, "when you have all the data, the impossible falls away and the truth stands revealed." I looked back over the assembled links, astonished once more at how invisible the chain had seemed until it tightened. The connection is clear now. Can you see every link locked in place? The link was there from the first powder trace. Did you forge the complete chain before Holmes laid it out? What would you have built from the mud, the silk, and the debts? Holmes saw 7 links, each forged in reason. How many did you count? Every link accounted for. The chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. The arrest of Reginald Blackwood took place the following morning, when the fog had finally begun to thin under a weak winter sun. Scotland Yard acted swiftly after Holmes's presentation at Baker Street. Inspector Lestrade arrived at Blackwood's Lombard Street office with 2 constables, just as the clerks were opening the ledgers for the day. The air in the narrow street carried the sharp tang of coal smoke from nearby chimneys and the faint, muddy reek of the river not far off. Hansom cabs clattered past, their wheels grinding on cold cobblestones still slick from overnight rain. Blackwood was at his desk when the door opened. He looked up, face paling, as he recognized Lestrade's uniform. The room smelled of fresh ink and old leather. A small coal fire crackled in the grate, its warmth doing little to ease the sudden chill that seemed to settle over everyone present. Blackwood rose slowly, hands trembling, "This is unnecessary," he said hoarsely. "I have explained everything to Mr. Holmes." Lestrade stepped forward, a voice firm but not unkind. "Reginald Blackwood, you are under arrest for the murder of Elias Thorne. Anything you say will be taken down and may be given in evidence." The constables moved to his sides. Blackwood offered no resistance, though his shoulders shook as the cold iron cuffs closed around his wrists. The metallic click echoed in the quiet office. One of the younger clerks gasped, another turned away, hand over mouth. Blackwood's eyes, once sharp with calculation, now stared blankly at the floorboards, as though the weight of the chain Holmes had forged had finally crushed him. They led him out to the waiting police van. A small crowd had gathered on the pavement, drawn by the sight of uniforms and the murmur of scandal. Gas lamps still burned faintly in the thinning fog. Their light flickered across Blackwood's bowed head as he was helped inside. The van doors shut with a heavy thud. Lestrade paused on the step, glancing back at the warehouse district across the river where the crime had occurred. At Scotland Yard, later that afternoon, Blackwood was placed in a small holding cell, whose walls reeked faintly of carbolic disinfectant and damp stone. The temperature was cold, the only warmth coming from a narrow barred window high above. He sat on the wooden bench, head in hands, the rough serge of his coat rasping against the wall as he shifted. When Lestrade entered with Holmes and me, Blackwood looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "I never intended murder," he repeated, voice cracking, "only to frighten him, to buy time. The debts were strangling me. Elias said he would expose me unless I made restitution. I thought if it looked like a ghost, like something impossible, the police would never trace it back. The silk cord, the powder, it was all from the warehouse stock. I knew the trapdoor from years of deliveries. I thought no one would connect the threads." He laughed bitterly, a hollow sound. "I even planted the glove, VL for Victor Langford. He had quarreled with Elias often enough. I thought suspicion would fall there. But you saw through it. Mud on my boots, silk in the cellar, the powder that clung like guilt. Every step I took carried evidence with me." Holmes stood silent for a moment, then spoke quietly. "You forgot, Mr. Blackwood, that the ground remembers, the powder remembers. Even the smallest link, once forged, binds irrevocably." Lestrade cleared his throat. "We've recovered the garrote, hidden in your own office safe, still dusted with talcum. The silk matches the missing bales. Your housekeeper's statement about the gambling debts, the solicitor's loan records, the hansom driver's testimony, all confirm the timeline. There are no loose ends." Blackwood nodded slowly, defeated. "I deserve what comes. Tell Mrs. Thorne. Tell her I am sorry. She never knew the half of it." Outside the yard, as we stepped into the fading daylight, the fog had almost lifted. The air felt cleaner, carrying only the ordinary smells of London: horse manure, coal smoke, whetstone. Lestrade clapped Holmes on the shoulder. "Another impossible crime solved, thanks to you. The commissioner will want a full report, but between us, this one will be talked about for years. The Wraith of Southwark turned out to be nothing more ghostly than greed and panic." Holmes inclined his head. "The credit belongs to observation, Inspector. The chain was there from the first link. We merely followed where it led." We returned to Baker Street in the late afternoon. The 17 steps felt lighter underfoot. Mrs. Hudson met us at the door with hot tea. Its steam rose in the warm sitting room, chasing away the last traces of the day's chill. The coal fire roared. The rich scent of Holmes's tobacco soon filled the air once more. I poured a measure of sweet brandy for each of us, its warmth spreading through my chest as I settled into my chair. "The case is closed," I said. Yet I still marvel at how nearly invisible the truth remained until every weak link shattered. Holmes drew on his pipe, eyes on the flames. Elementary, Watson. When deception is built on illusion, the smallest real trace, a powder flake, a silk thread, a footprint in mud, becomes the hammer that breaks the spell. The link was there from the beginning. Did you see justice tighten around him before the cuffs closed? Watson missed several final pieces until the end. Did you? What chain would you have followed to its conclusion? Holmes saw every link hold firm. How many did you recognize as decisive? The criminal bound. Justice served. Chapter 9. Links restored. The trial of Reginald Blackwood opened at the Old Bailey on a crisp December morning in 1892, when the last traces of autumn fog had given way to a sharp, clear frost that sparkled on the cobblestones outside the great court. Inside the famous courtroom the air was close and heavy, smelling of polished oak, old paper, and the faint carbolic tang that always lingered in places of official justice. Gas lamps burned steadily along the walls, despite the daylight filtering through high windows. Their soft hiss mingled with the low murmur of spectators and the rustle of legal papers. Blackwood stood in the dock, pale and diminished. His once confident posture now stooped beneath the weight of evidence and public gaze. His counsel, a competent but uninspired barrister, had argued diminished responsibility due to the crushing burden of debt, but the chain Holmes had forged proved too strong to break. Witness after witness took the stand. The former housekeeper who spoke of late-night gambling losses, the solicitor who produced loan documents bearing Blackwood's frantic signatures, the handsome driver who placed him near Tooley Street at the fatal hour, Silas Crowe, trembling but resolute, who described the cloaked figure and the powdered silk cord. Lestrade himself gave evidence of the recovered garrote hidden in Blackwood's safe, its fibers matching the missing Bombay silks. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice rang clear in the hushed chamber. Guilty. Blackwood swayed slightly, but made no outcry. The judge, in his black cap, pronounced sentence, death by hanging. A ripple passed through the gallery, then silence fell again, broken only by the scratch of the clerk's pen recording the verdict. Outside the court, the London streets resumed their ordinary rhythm. Hansom cabs clattered past, drivers calling for fares. Newspaper boys shouted the afternoon editions with headlines already proclaiming, "Southwark Wraith unmasked, partner hanged for murder." The frost had begun to melt under weak sunlight, leaving damp patches on the cold cobblestones that gleamed like dark mirrors. In the days that followed, the innocent parties found their lives slowly restored. Amelia Thorne, freed at last from the shadow of suspicion that had hung over her husband's death, appeared at the reading of the will in her Kensington drawing-room. The air there smelled once more of lavender and fresh tea. The silk cushions on the chairs felt smooth and comforting beneath her hands as the solicitor read aloud. Elias Thorne's estate, though reduced by debts Blackwood had concealed, passed cleanly to her and to young Edgar. Amelia spoke quietly to me afterward, her voice steady for the first time since the tragedy. "I thought I should never escape the whispers," she said, people looked at me as though I might have known, or worse. Now I can mourn my husband properly, without fear. Edgar Thorne, too, found relief. The modest inheritance he received allowed him to settle modest debts and begin a small importing venture of his own, honest trade, free from the stain of his uncle's murder. He called at Baker Street one afternoon to thank Holmes personally. The coal fire burned warmly. The rich tobacco scent filled the room as Edgar shook my friend's hand. "You gave me back my future, sir," he said simply. "I shall never forget it." Hargrove, the butler, whose powder vial had briefly cast suspicion upon him, secured new employment with a city merchant who valued loyalty over pedigree. Victor Langford, who, cleared of any complicity, expanded his fireworks trade without the cloud of rivalry-turned-murder hanging over him. He sent Holmes a case of fine Cuban cigars by way of gratitude. Their aroma mingled pleasantly with Holmes's shag when my friend sampled one that evening. As for Silas Crowe, the watchman whose terrified silence had nearly derailed the case, Holmes arranged through Lestrade that no charges would be pressed for withholding evidence. Crowe found steadier work as a night porter at a respectable warehouse nearer the river. The regular wage and the absence of ghostly tales seemed to steady his nerves at last. London itself appeared to breathe more easily. The gas lights along Tooley Street burned as brightly as ever. Hansom cabs continued their ceaseless rounds. The Thames flowed on, carrying its familiar muddy scent downstream. The Wraith of Southwark faded from the tavern gossip into a cautionary tale told on foggy nights, proof that no illusion, however clever, could withstand the patient forging of truth. At Baker Street one quiet evening, as the coal fire crackled and rain pattered gently against the panes, Holmes sat with his violin across his knees, plucking a slow, meditative air. I poured us each a measure of sweet brandy. Its warmth spread through me as I watched the flames dance. "Order returns slowly," I remarked, "but it does return." Holmes nodded, setting the instrument aside. Deception disrupts, observation restores. The chain that binds the guilty also frees the innocent. Every link, once tested, serves justice in the end. The connection was always there, waiting to be forged. Did you see how suspicion lifted from the blameless before the verdict fell? Watson missed the quiet aftermath until it unfolded. Did you? What chain would you follow to restore balance after such a crime? Holmes saw the final links, truth and mercy, hold firm. How many did you recognize as essential to closure? Order restored to London's streets. Chapter 10. By the fire at Baker Street. Several weeks had passed since the black cap was placed upon the judge's head at the Old Bailey, and London had settled once more into its familiar winter rhythms. The fog returned in gentle waves, softer now, as though the city itself had exhaled after the long strain of the case. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire burned steadily on a quiet January evening in 1893. Its crackling warmth filled the sitting room, chasing away the chill that still clung to the window panes. The rich scent of Holmes's shag tobacco curled lazily upward, mingling with the faint sweetness of the brandy I had poured for us both. Mrs. Hudson had left a tray of hot tea earlier. Its steam had long since faded, but the porcelain cups remained warm to the touch. Holmes sat in his favorite armchair, long legs stretched toward the hearth, the Stradivarius resting across his knees. He drew the bow across the strings in a slow, meditative air, something from Bach, gentle and unhurried. I occupied my usual chair opposite, journal open on my lap, pen idle for once. The 17 steps had felt lighter these past days. The house itself seemed easier in its breathing. "The newspapers have finally tired of the Wraith of Southwark," I remarked, breaking the comfortable silence. This morning's edition carried only a brief notice. Blackwood executed at Newgate. Justice concluded. Holmes inclined his head without looking up. Justice concluded, yes. Yet the chain that bound him was forged long before the gallows. Every link, powder, silk, mud, debt had its place. Remove one, and the structure might have held. Remove them all, and nothing remained but truth. He set the violin aside and reached for his pipe, filling it thoughtfully from the Persian slipper. The tobacco caught. Blue smoke drifted toward the ceiling. "You have asked me often, Watson, how the method works. Tonight, by this fire, let me explain it plainly. The chain of deduction is no mystic art. It is observation distilled through logic. Each fact is a link, cold, hard, physical. The white powder on Thorne's collar, the silk fiber in the garrote mark, the distinctive hobnail print in cellar mud, the hurried signatures in falsified ledgers, the testimony of a frightened watchman, the timeline of a hansom ride, the weight of gambling debts pressing on a desperate mind. Alone, each is suggestive but fragile. Joined in sequence, tested against every alternative, they become unbreakable." He leaned forward, eyes bright in the firelight. "I recall The Hound of the Baskervilles, not because the cases resemble each other in plot, but because both rested on illusion designed to terrify. There, on the moor, a spectral hound glowing with phosphorus was used to revive an ancient legend and drive a man to his death. Every link in that chain was physical. The luminous paint on the animal's hide, the footprints too large for any natural dog, the family portrait showing the same facial malformation, the hidden portrait behind the panel, the boot stolen to give scent, the bog that swallowed evidence but could not swallow logic. Stapleton overlooked that nature itself betrays deception. Butterflies pinned in a case revealed his entomological knowledge. The fog on the moor carried his footsteps. The phosphorus glowed only because he applied it. He thought legend would shield him. Instead, legend became the chain that bound him when every real trace was forged together. Holmes drew deeply on his pipe, the bowl glowing red. Here, too, Blackwood relied on the supernatural, a wraith in a locked room, a strangling without visible hands. Yet the powder remembered its theatrical origin. The silk remembered its importer. The mud remembered the very yard where he stood. Observation defeats deception, because deception requires the criminal to ignore the physical world. He sees only his plan. We see the traces he cannot help but leave. Eliminate the impossible. No entry except the trap door. No weapon except silk. No motive except debt. And what remains, however improbable at first glance, must be truth. He paused, letting the fire's crackle fill the silence. The science of deduction is patient. It demands data, not inspiration. It asks not, who might have done this, but what has been done and what must follow from it. When you train yourself to see, not merely look, the world becomes legible. A flake of powder is no longer dust. It is a signature. A thread is no longer lint. It is a confession. Link by link, reason forges what fear and greed would hide. I sipped my brandy, its sweet warmth lingering on the tongue. "You make it sound inevitable," I said. "It is, once the chain is complete. Until then, it is merely possible. That is why I urge patience, Watson, and why I urge our readers, yes, you who follow these accounts, to practice the same habit. Forge your own chains carefully. Question every assumption. Test every link. The truth rarely shouts. It whispers through the smallest details. Holmes rose, crossed to the window, and looked out at the gaslit street below. A hansom cab passed, its wheels whispering on the damp stones. Big Ben tolled the hour, distant and solemn. "Until the next puzzle presents itself," he said softly, "we rest. But rest, too, is preparation. The world never ceases to offer new links." I closed my journal, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a case well concluded. The link was there from the first faint powder trace. Did you see the full chain form before the firelight revealed it? Watson learned slowly. Did you learn faster? What chain would you forge from the clues scattered across these pages? Holmes saw every link, tested and true. How many did you recognize as decisive? Until the next chain forges, dear listener, the game continues.